Guys, welcome to the show. I am really excited because I have my friend Rebekah Poirier here, and she is autistic. She is fabulous. She is wonderfully wired, and she is one hell of a woman. I'm telling you, she has had some fantastic experiences. She's had some really crap experiences. I think we can all relate to both of those. But we're going to be talking about a couple of different things today. Number one, we're going to be talking about workforce and some of the really horrific things that happen because, yeah, we can get our foot in the door, we can get the job, and that in itself are some serious hurdles and barriers. But once we get there and we start to navigate the workplace, we've been there for a little bit, there's some things that make it really difficult. And that's some of the biggest challenges we face is how do we keep the job that we have? And sometimes it doesn't work out that way. Sometimes, we get to a point where we're really struggling and we need some help. We need some accommodations, some adjustments made to our work to make it possible to continue so that we're not living on that chronic cycle burnout trap, so that we're thriving. So Rebekah and I are going to be talking about all those things today. Stay tuned. Hi, I'm Carole Jean, founder and host of Mind Your Autistic Brain talk show and community. And you're about to experience the new way to thrive in life and relationships as a late identified autistic by unveiling who you are, how you communicate, finding your self-care plan from the inside out, and being the authentic creator of your best life. Get ready, because this is where we go against the mainstream, say no to outdated society norms, and we say yes to who we are in order to create a joy-filled, balanced, and more neurodistinct world. Welcome to Mind Your Autistic Brain. Rebekah, welcome to the show. I am so excited you're here, my friend.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm honored to be here and happy that you asked me to be on the show. And this is great. I love this.
Well, this is an exciting thing because Rebekah is also one of our Coaching Cafe Academy members, and we are talking all about communication styles this week, and we have some incredible things that have been coming up and coming out. And so we're going to have just sort of a conversation about all the things that are happening in our life right now because, guys, that's just sort of where we are in the world. Sometimes, we're seeking information, we're seeking just connection to somebody else that's experiencing the world in a similar way. And hopefully today, Rebekah and I are connecting with you and maybe sharing a little bit of our lives that may help with yours. So Rebekah, share with us sort of how autism came into your life. How did you learn and discover that you are autistic?
Yeah, so I come from a very, family of neurodistinct. I'm going to try to borrow that word from you, individuals, but I personally was not diagnosed until just a few weeks before my 40th birthday. So you've been there too. All throughout school and childhood, I had good grades. I worked really hard for my B's and C's and occasional A's. So I kind of floated under the radar. I very vaguely remember being evaluated for learning disabilities, specifically ADHD, dyslexia. I was having trouble with reading comprehension. Later, I found out I have a problem with my vision that probably caused all of that. That wasn't tested. But, back in that time period, autism was not commonly diagnosed. You didn't get a diagnosis unless you had severe communication problems or were nonverbal or needed a lot of support. So, it just wasn't something that came up during my childhood experience. So I always struggled socially. I didn't always fit in with my peer groups. I didn't enjoy superficial activities or relationships. I had very few close-knit sets of friends. So by the time I was in the 10th grade, I was just done with school and done with all of it. And my parents were very gracious and patient with me. So they decided to homeschool me for the rest of my education. I went to community college. I applied to NC State University. I got in because my grades were good. I worked really hard, worked multiple part-time jobs, but I had absolutely zero self-confidence. And I had a line of bad relationships, just couldn't figure out how to navigate relationships. Had a hard time getting a job because just the interview process was not geared towards me. And because I didn't do a lot of the social clubs in college, that stuff wasn't on my resume. So I couldn't even speak to that. So I was very timid, very not confident. But I ended up getting an internship with the federal government and moving to Washington, D.C. all by myself, which was, I think, extremely, really the best thing for me in hindsight, because it allowed me to kind of explore things on my own and figure some things out. And working in the government, there's a lot of nuances, but I'll be honest with you, if I had gotten a job somewhere else, like in public accounting, I think I would have been fired in my first 2 years, just because, different social faux pas or different, just different ways of thinking. The government was the best place for me at that time. And I did really well in government. I was promoted quickly. It's a very diverse workplace. They understand Americans with Disabilities Act, and they understand the EEOC, honestly, because they've been sued so many times. But, it was part of your normal training regimen. So I had a good experience there. But it was also about that time that other members of my family started coming up with this autism diagnosis. And I started, doing all the research, just trying to understand them and what was going on. And as I'm reading through the autism symptoms, I'm starting to notice, things in my everyday life where I'm like, well, that's not autism. That's just normal. That's just part of growing up. And so in the back of my mind, though, I started to wonder, is this something that also relates to me and explains, why I'm the way I am? But at that time, I wasn't struggling, or at least, not at that moment. So it wasn't something I was going to go out and seek. I was just kind of filing that in the back of my brain going, that's interesting. So after 13 years in government, my husband and I were ready for a change. We moved away from the DC area. I got a job in the private sector. Again, it took me a very long time to find a job. I struggled with interviews. I struggled with my resume. And then when I did get a job, there was not the same structure. There was not the same support. I only stayed at my first job for just barely a year. And moved to a different job. I think that was really the start of my major burnout. And that went on for 4 years, where I just was struggling, moving from job to job. We also ended up moving to a very small town in Georgia, which is where we live now, back in 2019. And it was just, it was a culture shock. I might as well have been dropped on a different planet, just because, I thought I was a Southern girl growing up in North Carolina, but that ain't the same as Georgia. There's a different.
I'm an Alabama girl. I know what you're talking about because I've lived in North Carolina. There is a difference.
There is a difference. So I just had I was just reaching this culmination. And then of course, COVID happened and everything shut down. So then things changed again and my social groups were all disheveled. So in the summer of 2020, I was really experiencing both physical and mental signs of burnout. And I completely shut down emotionally, physically, mentally. I lost valuable skills. I couldn't multitask anymore. I'd have trouble communicating. This girl who was really good at navigating around the swamp in Washington, D.C. and could, run programs in her sleep, suddenly couldn't figure out what 13 steps I need to do to get ready in the morning, I was struggling. I'm going to try to make these notifications go off so it's not interrupting me. Sorry about that. So I was really struggling about that time. And I remembered my earlier thoughts about autism and the research I had done. And I specifically started looking for someone who could evaluate me as a nearly 40-year-old woman for autism before simply accepting that this was anxiety or some sort of mental health issue. Like I was okay with that being the outcome, but I wanted to seek that evaluation first.
Now I have a question about that.
Mhm.
Was that something you had found like in your research or, being on the online autistic community that that could be a challenge, that finding a provider who was familiar with adult late identification, or was that just like something in you said, I got to find somebody that knows what they're doing?
So it didn't really come up in research, but I tried for about 6 months. So I went to be honest, in my area, there's not a lot of mental health care to begin with. There's just a handful of organizations. I called one and they were like, well, several of them told me flat out, we don't evaluate adults, period. We only evaluate children. So I finally found, I think it was the Autism Hope Center near me. And I talked to this wonderful lady, and now I can't even remember her name, but she actually called around and found me somebody who would evaluate me as an adult. None of it was covered by insurance. So this was, $3,000-$4,000 later. I had to drive 2 hours out of town because and I'm apparently lucky that it was only 2 hours. Like I know some people who've had to leave their states to find somebody who would even talk to them about autism. But I did find a specialist, and I was officially diagnosed in the fall of 2020, so in October. And it did not take long because like in the very first session, after just talking to me for an hour, she gave me her professional opinion and said, I think, it's worth exploring the autism diagnosis because, you're exhibiting a lot of the signs that would, point me in that direction.
And
Yeah.
at that time, were you aware that you were in autistic burnout, or you just knew there was something serious happening?
I just knew there was something seriously wrong. And I knew this wasn't normal. This was not a normal level of burnout. This was not just, a career burnout or like something that I could just change a few things and get out of. I was having physical issues. Like I wasn't sleeping. I was bumping into walls. I was dropping things. My hand-eye coordination was off. Like I said, I was having trouble. And when I say I couldn't multitask, I mean, I couldn't fold the laundry and talk on the phone at the same time. Like not complicated tasks, like stuff I had done all my life. So, and everything had to be written down. I used to be able to memorize my calendar and not even have to look it up. Like I could just see it in my head. And now and I still struggle. Like I haven't gotten some of these skills back. And this was 2 years ago.
Okay.
So
So
everything
let's
has to
talk
be
about
written
that
down.
for just a sec, because that's a really big component and part that a lot of us experience in autistic burnout. And what's interesting and what I've discovered for myself and what I'm discovering with a lot of the clients that I've been coaching over the last couple of years, because they're finally getting to that point of restoration, because part of autistic burnout is that we lose skills and abilities to that degree. And a lot of it can be that we lose those skills and abilities. And when they start to return, they never fully return to the level they were before we hit burnout. And that's a lot of what the research is saying. What's been interesting is I've discovered for myself, and several of my coaching clients have started to discover this for themselves in the last 6 months to a year, which has just been really exciting because we didn't know this was possible. I didn't know this was possible. I'm just entering my 3rd year of being burnout free for the first time since I was 6 years old. I mean, That's
Wow.
pretty flipping huge because I've never gone this long. Really. I've never gotten to this point of restoration. It's like this constant scramble and loss of functionality and like hit this trough of like, holy cow, I can't even put one foot in front of the other because I can't remember without falling over. Right. Because your balance is a big part of that. But what's been really fantastic is there have been skills and talents and abilities that I lost decades ago in a burnout that have come back. And that is just, I was like, I never thought that I would write like creatively ever again, because it was just not happening for like 15, 20 years. And within the last year or two, it started to come back. And I didn't even recognize that it had started to return until I was like, wow, I've actually written. I didn't even recognize I had done it. It just happened. And I was like, holy cow, I haven't done this for years. I haven't had the ability, the capacity, or the desire to do this in forever. I didn't think I would ever be here again. I thought that was gone. And that simply was through getting restoration, getting to my thriving place and out of burnout long enough for them to start coming back. It's possible. And that's the exciting part. So please don't, that was the most heart-wrenching and frightening thing that I learned when I started looking into autistic burnout research for adults. And there's very little, first of all, and there's very little significant data. Okay. There's just a little bit of hit and miss trickles out there, but something is absolutely better than nothing. And the more conversations we have about it, the likelihood of more valuable research from our perspective and our needs happens. And one of the big statistics and the data points that came out of some of the limited research I looked at was that you could lose skills and abilities permanently. Like they would never come back. And all I could think was, my God, I have worked so hard my whole life to acquire the skills, abilities, and level of functioning that I have. And now someone is telling me that I could potentially, the things that I've lost in burnout may not ever come back. I cried. And all I could think was, I've got to figure this out. I'll be damned if I have worked my tail off to get this and to lose it and never get it back, because I'm camouflaging myself to death. I'm not listening to my own needs. I've never set a boundary. I've never self-cared. I've never done any of these things because no one talked to me about them, because somehow it's like the unspoken understanding in the rest of the world that you acquire and develop these skills and things that help you function in the world. And it was such a big thing, so I'm really curious, as you went from your job with the government and then you went into the private sector, you noted that there is a big differentiator between accommodations and what was being made available. What was that? Like, what were some of the big, like, stark, glaring differences when you entered the private sector?
So, of course, I didn't know I was autistic when I was working for the government. So I didn't ever ask for specific accommodations. But I'd say one of the biggest things is I was always in a very diverse working environment, not just, race, sex, creed, but, disability wise or, neurodiversity wise. There was just a vast amount of diversity. Then I got to the private sector. It was a lot more homogeneous, a lot more people who, look and act the same and therefore think the same. The other thing I noticed is even in the job announcements in the private sector, and this is something that I had to go back and think about, even the job announcements, when you see things like, we're looking for a good fit, or, we're looking for someone who's going to be a good fit to our team. That is code for, we're looking for we're a homogeneous work environment. If you do not look, think, act the same as everybody else, we're not really interested in you. And that was a real shock because I never saw job announcements like that in government. It was very much skills based, you have to have these specific skills. It was more based on what skills can you bring. And even the ADA process, even though I didn't go through it, was addressed up front because, they would ask, do you have any needs, any accommodations? The other thing is the training that we received in government was, every year, and it almost felt like every 6 months, we were having some sort of diversity training or, training on the Americans with the Disabilities Act and the EEOC. And, we would roll our eyes and go, oh, I got to do this again, but we didn't. In the private sector, I noticed not only was I not given that level of information, my managers weren't either. And even my human resources people, like when I did get to the point where I started asking for accommodation, I was educating the HR people on what the law said. They just didn't seem to have a clue. And the process to go through the accommodation process took months. I mean, we're talking a minimum of 3 to 6 months. And if you're thinking about the fact that you can't effectively perform your job to your full potential for that 3 to 6 months period because you're waiting on an accommodation or you haven't had that interactive process, that hurts everybody. So I felt like that was one of the biggest differences as well, just the level of education on what, as an employer, your responsibilities are, what your employees' rights are under those laws and regulations. Just not having a full understanding of that, and then having these arduous processes you have to go through and hundreds of dollars of doctor's appointments, just to prove that, no, I really do have a problem.
Yeah. And then a
it
lot
can
of
be
times,
accommodated.
right. And a lot of times what I'm also hearing from a lot of my clients is that they've gone through that process. They've spent the money. I mean, and it's rigorous to try and get a doctor to write an accommodation for you. And then you get this, you finally have this accommodation letter of, this is what I need to help make my life and my ability to perform the skills and abilities that I have to execute them in a way that's not going to impact my quality of life. Because that work-life balance is so important. And that's something that we all seek. It doesn't matter your neurotype. And then you show up with this at HR and they have no framework, they have no structure, they have no guidelines that they have in place to follow when someone submits a request. And then they look at the doctor's letter and they're like, oh, we can't accept that. Or that's not good enough. It doesn't say this, this, and this, because really they don't know what they're asking for half the time.
Yeah.
And those delays are only harming everyone, the individual and the company, because at that point, nothing is working well. And it's just these small little things. And one of the things that really chaps my backside is the term reasonable accommodation.
Because who gets to determine
reasonable accommodation? And that is so subjective. Who gets to set and define what's reasonable? There is entirely too much room for interpretation there. And my opinion is if someone is really in this day and age, and I am working so hard to change this, if someone has they're so miserable that they have just said, screw it, or they have gotten brave enough that they are standing up for themselves for the first time in their life and said, I really need this, then it's needed. There is no reason necessary. It's needed.
Well, and the other thing I ran into was none of the accommodations I requested cost any money, required, restructuring or anything like that. I was asking for things like I would like to have once a week meetings with my manager to go over the priorities for the week. I would like for you not to come to me with an assignment at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, knowing that's when I'm burned out, and saying it has to be done that evening when really it doesn't need to be done until the next day. Or, I need to have a workspace that's, quiet, in a quiet area, where the lighting is good, not, next to the bathroom or the break room. you know, um, it was all stuff like that really could have been accommodated within 24 hours. I mean, it really wasn't anything that I felt would, like you said, be unreasonable. In fact, I kind of feel like I've heard the analogy that, people with autism are canaries in the coal mine, because back in the coal miner days, or, back many years ago, they would use canaries to indicate what the air quality was in the coal mines. And so if the canary was suffering, then obviously, they needed to get the rest of the guys out because the air quality wasn't good. So I'm just feeling the effects of the work environment that everybody is feeling, but because I'm more sensitive to it for whatever reason, I'm the one squawking or sounding like I'm squawking. But really, any changes to the work environment isn't just going to help me. It's going to help everybody in that work environment. Everybody could use regular meetings with their managers. Everybody could use, a clear understanding of their work and their deadlines. Everybody could use, a quiet, good work environment. I wasn't asking for anything unreasonable, yet it took, I think, a total of 3 months for them to even start the interactive process, where I heard nothing but radio silence. Like, it wasn't even like we were having conversations with HR. It
So
was
what
radio
happened
silence.
right. And in that radio silence,
Mhm.
there's a lot of extra anxiety and stress that I would imagine for me, I know would happen, because you start to think, oh my gosh, are they just planning on figuring out how to fire me right now?
Yes. Yeah.
Right. That's terrifying. That is, like, almost in my mind, creating a hostile work environment.
Yeah. So one of the things, when I finally did, and I had to step up and go to my HR and say, hey, can we at least start having the conversation, after several weeks, a couple of months. And they did. And the only thing that they were really offering me as an accommodation was they offered me a demotion. And I said, well, first of all, if my understanding of the ADA is that you can offer me another job, but it has to be an equivalent job, even if it's not, in the same department, that job needs to be made available to me. And she said, well, you're welcome to go out on the company website and apply for other jobs. And I said, no, your HR, you're supposed to be making those jobs available to me. You don't just offer me a demotion. And I looked at the job description of the demotion, and it was basically my same job with, maybe a little bit of tweaking here and there in wording, but it was basically the same job I was doing, working for the same department, the same managers. It was just less pay. And I got off of that phone conversation as quickly as possible. And I picked up the phone and called an employment lawyer because I knew at that moment, all of this, everything that they've done over the past, 3 months, was look for a way to get rid of me, either force me into a situation where I'm going to quit, or demote me, or fire me. And so I felt like I needed to get somebody who could advocate for me to at least stop that from happening and allow me time to figure out what I was going to do next. Because I was to the point where I was even going to my healthcare provider and saying, is there a way I can apply for short-term disability? Because I just need a break. I need a couple of months just to recover from this major burnout that I had.
We're going to take just a quick break so that Megan and I can share something really amazing and super exciting with you guys. Megan has put together resources for neurodivergent adults. Finally, and I contributed to this, and I'm so excited because there were lots of us who are neurodivergent coaches who came together to share some of our paid resources for free with you for just a small window of time. And that will be from March 21st through March 28th. So if you're tired of looking for resources to help yourself as a neurodivergent adult and pretty much exclusively finding resources designed for parents of neurodivergent kids, we totally get it. That's why we all teamed up and came together with some of the best and most innovative neurodivergent creators on the internet to provide you with a whole host of completely free resources. Don't miss out. Make sure you get on the wait list. Use the link in the show notes below. The course is called the Big Beautiful Brain Bundle. And I love that Megan came up with that name. She's so creative. That's her ADHD entrepreneurial brain in creative mode. Isn't it great? So there's a course on executive dysfunction, an ADHD bundle for beginners, a workshop all about how to schedule breaks. When's the last time you took a break? A neurodivergent entrepreneurial toolkit, a video course that I created on sharing that you are autistic, and of course, the amazing task initiation webinar. Oh, I think those of us who have been in stuck mode love that idea. And Megan's Get Done Masterclass. I don't have one of those cool trick buttons, so I had to make my own noise for the SH part. Don't you love me? I scare myself sometimes, guys. Anyway, back to the show.
Is there, something I can do there? But, when I got the response from HR and from my employer, it was very clear that that was not going to be the deal. They wanted to get rid of me. They didn't know what to do with me. So their answer was to get rid of me.
Yeah. And I see that so often. And what is really horrific about that is that it's so easy. It really and truly is. It's so simple to just simply set up a framework, to have this already within your company. And it's something that should be offered to every employee from the very start. Because when we are meeting the needs of the individual employee, the individual person, we are creating a more effective and dynamic workforce within our company because we are allowing people to function at their best. When we operate from the broken business management and human resources model of creating cookie cutter employees that can be plugged into any part of the company and still function, that methodology and that mindset and that approach has created the work environment we have today, the broken, dysfunctional workforce that we have within companies, the company cultures, the mindset that everyone should be interchangeable no matter what the job, laterally, or if you're going up and down the ladder, that everyone should be somehow homogenous and all be of the same thinking and the same mind. That is where you lack innovation. That is where you lack creativity. If everyone is seeing the same 6 and no one's seeing the 9, no one is seeing it from the side, no one's seeing it from above, no one's seeing it from every direction possible, we miss opportunities. We miss potential places for innovation that change not just the field that we're in, but that change our humanity across the board. And what we're doing in the process of this cookie cutter mentality is we're killing people, both figuratively and literally, of all neurotypes. Because if you go out into the workforce world, you go out on Google and you just search in work-life balance, work burnout, it's not just happening in our neurotype. It's happening in every neurotype. You got neurotypical people talking about work-life balance and burnout and trying to find a way to balance that right now. I mean, and for all the stuff that COVID has been, that has just been horrific, there have been some silver linings. And that is that the people who have just been suppressing it and knuckling down and gritting through it, the canaries have been squawking for a while. It's finally hitting some of the other ones. It's finally hitting the rest of us, apparently, in the world. And that's a good thing. It's a good thing. And I hate that you have been through this. I hate that this has been your experience. But because you've had this experience, because you are now seeing this, you're sharing, we're talking about this today. This is where change happens. This is where change starts to make a shift in the place that we are right now, because there's so much that needs to change. And there's ways to do it that don't require the 60+ page Autism at Work playbook, right? I mean, guys, there's fantastic ways to do things. And sometimes we can just like overstructure the crap out of something. And sometimes it's just about streamlining a process and thinking about things in a different way. So if you, Rebekah, I would really love to have your insight on this. So if you would, with what you've experienced, with what you know now, what you've learned about yourself as an autistic person and what your needs are, your accommodation needs, what would be a suggestion that you would make to a company, to a human resources department? Because you've got a lot of knowledge, you've got a lot of experience. And because, of your time in the government, that really helped with what you knew, because you didn't immediately go, oh, well, I guess I'll just take that job. Or you didn't automatically go, well, I guess that's the only thing they're going to give me. I'll just have to struggle through it. Apparently, that's just how it is. You didn't do that. And that's different, because a lot of us would have, been really upset about it and then felt like we had no other option but just to take that. Mm-hmm. So what are some suggestions that you would make for human resources managers and companies for an accommodation process? What would you like to see change in this?
Yeah, there's several things. First of all, I would start with build a culture of diversity. Just embrace diversity. Stop writing the job announcements that say, we're looking for someone who'd be a good fit to our team, because that's code for, we don't want you, neurodiverse person. And include all types of diversity, including neurotypes. And then I'd say build a training and education program that focuses on the different neurotypes and the different types of diversity that's out there. But then also make sure not just your HR, not just your managers, but everybody in the company understands what is required under the laws that we have in this country, under the laws of your state, wherever your jurisdiction is, because each state is different. And help your employees know that they can come and ask you for an accommodation. And it doesn't even have to be a long, arduous, overly documented process. If an employee comes to their manager and says, hey, I'm struggling with this, can you make an accommodation here? That manager that day has the power to make that accommodation. And actually they have the responsibility to under the law. If they need to document it for HR, that's fine. There's laws and regulations that govern how that should happen. It shouldn't be advertised to the whole company. But, I feel like there's so many barriers to even managers being able to provide accommodation. So let's take away those barriers. Let's have a good diversity communication and education. And then let's also, create the processes, and don't just create them and then set them aside and wait till somebody uses them. Make sure you're reviewing them on at least an annual basis, because like the form I had to fill out for my process was a non-fillable PDF that had little boxes about this big, to describe my needs. I had to attach a bunch of stuff to it manually. and scan it and send it to my HR person. Like, it is 2022. We can come up with a process and a way to communicate better than that. And then as soon as that person does submit all of that information that you think you need, have the conversation with the person. Like, go ahead and start that interactive process, because what at least happened to me, something else I noticed was when they waited 3 months and came to their own conclusions, there was some conclusions or some misunderstandings about what I was even asking for. And if they had just come to me, immediately after I submitted my request and said, can you elaborate on this? We can't provide this, but maybe we could do something different. I was not involved in any of those kind of discussions. So they just made their own determinations based on what they thought I was saying or asking for, and it ended up being wrong. So that level of communication needs to happen. It needs to happen like at the very beginning of the process, not 3-6 months later.
I have the feeling, and this is just, my perception and my diagnostic of it. And it's that there's so many things, because human resources departments, when it comes to accommodations in particular, if you're not well educated in the legal side of it and what your responsibilities are, you're so afraid of the risk and exposure. You're afraid to have a conversation because you might say something that gets you sued. Mm. So they avoid the conversation altogether and make their own determinations, which are usually completely wrong, do not align with what's actually being requested, because there's a fear of getting sued. There's a fear of making a misstep. There's a fear of offending the person who's asking for help. Did you kind of get maybe some of that feeling at all?
I felt like especially when I started poking around and saying, hey, can we talk about this? Or, have you come to any conclusions? Have you talked to my manager? I would get very, very short responses back. And I think that might've been some of that fear of, oh, well, we can't, just fear of, stepping over a line that I wasn't even drawing. I was just trying to get information about my request. But I could tell there was like almost like a wall put up immediately after I put in my request between me and HR and me and my managers, because, it was suddenly something, well, we can't talk about it because it has to go through this process first,
But there's really no process.
But the process wasn't outlined to me. So I didn't know what they were doing. I didn't know.
So you had no idea even what their quote unquote process meant.
Was. Yeah.
Right. You're like, what should I be expecting? What's the timeline? And that's another big one, not having any communication that gives you a timeline for expectations.
Mm-hmm. Because the response I kept getting back was, we're still going through the process, but then no explanation of what the process was or where they were in that process, mm-hmm. And it was clear to me that I wasn't going to hear the outcome until the very end. And that is not in accordance with the laws and regulations of this country.
No, it's not.
There is supposed to be an interaction between you and the employee, not just I submitted something and now it's for you to accept or reject. That's not how this is supposed to go.
Yeah. We are not subjugated without input.
Yeah. Yeah.
So let's take this, because I feel like this is sort of the next layer to it. Let's talk about communication styles. Mm-hmm. So I would love for you to share, because you were becoming a very skilled communication style recognizer. You are. So if you had to apply like what you've learned in the academy and about the different communication styles, this is a slow process, and it's something Allie and I both kind of share, because we didn't want you guys to feel like at the end of this first month, when we talked about communication styles, you should be able to recognize them all over the place. Mm-hmm. Like you should immediately be able to pick it out, because that is just not how we experience it or learn it. It's something that's slowly integrated. But I would love to know, like with communication styles, like from where you started to where you are today, because we're week 3, we're, just kind of moving through this. What are some of the big insights, and what are some of maybe the big hurdles that you're facing with communication styles, and sort of what's your primary communication style, and how did it feel to be able to recognize that you had this primary communication style that was sort of your natural one, and that you had sort of a secondary one, and then you also had kind of that one that you slip into sometimes in certain situations?
Yeah. So I will say that I am very much a factor communicator. And you can ask any family member and they will agree. Like Rebekah is about the facts. She's not going to throw a lot of emotion into it. She goes into the conversation. These are the things I want to get out of this conversation, and then I'm done. And I have tried, especially as I've recently started my own business. And so I have clients I need to talk to, and now I've got employees that I need to talk to. I've tried to not be just about the facts, ma'am, type person. But that's primarily where I start out, and so I try to integrate the listening style, within that, so that it's not just, me trying to glean information. How can I communicate to this person, that I care that they're a person, and I'm happy that they're helping me, through this process. So that's been an eye opener, and also a challenge. The other part that's a little bit strange and challenging, is my communication with the director style. So I personally, will sometimes go into the director style communication. I am married to a director communicator. But I'm also not very receptive to that, because I think, especially since, doing a lot of reflection back in my life, there have been times where I felt like I've been manipulated or overly controlled. So my visceral response sometimes to that director is, stop bossing me around. Who do you think you are? And I'm starting to realize, okay, that's not the intention. That's just the way this person is communicating. And then maybe I need to, again, move into more the listener style to try to kind of, I guess, figure out what the situation is before then moving into my natural factor style of, well, you've missed this, and this. So I think those are the ones that, I tend to see frequently. The one I don't have as much experience with is the captivator style. So I'm trying to be a little attuned to that and see if I can recognize the captivator style, a little bit better. But yeah, I've learned a lot.
Interesting. I'm so glad. I love having this conversation the way you break it down, because I think that's one of the things that Allie and I talk about. I think that was one of the questions we asked you guys, in sort of the reflection question, is which communication style are you just not? Like, this does not show up for you. It is so completely against the grain. It is not your natural. It is not even happening. And it was really interesting because we all have one of those. I mean, there's 4 communication styles that we use as sort of the big chunks, right? Like, and there's always variations, and there's, mixing of those styles. But what's interesting is we all have one that is just like, nah, that is just not me. That does not happen in my world. And what's interesting is that when we've identified what that one is for us, like, that's not me. It's interesting when we start to recognize, when we have a conversation with someone and we're feeling our bodies get a little anxious or uncomfortable, or we're not feeling good in the conversation, it's usually because the person who's communicating with us is using that style that we just don't jive with. Like, it's not in our jam system. And it's so funny because that was like, once I asked a question to somebody in the group. I was like, because they said, I'm so not a director. Like that just isn't the one that does not fall in my world. And I said, well, how does it feel? Like, because we had you guys identify the people in your lives, your family and friends, and start to sort of identify their primary natural communication style. And I said, well, of the people in your life that you've identified that are a director, how do you feel when you have a conversation with them? How's that experience? And it's usually, it's just really uncomfortable. It's really hard to have a conversation. Like we seem to have a communication mismatch and everybody misunderstands the other person. It just never goes well. It's a mess. And it's so interesting because now I think what's been kind of cool is people are telling me, oh, I know I see it differently. Because like directors are communicating in a direct fashion, just like it says. They're communicating to give you the information that you need or that they think you need to move forward because they want to help you. And when you know that they're not just being bossy flossies, that they're actually trying to help you, it just comes across in this very direct manner because they don't want to mix up and confuse the conversation, right? Because maybe they're in burnout. Maybe they're at the end of their day. Maybe they have a shot glass that they can take information in or give information out. It's not early, maybe during their peak performance hours when they've got like maybe a quart jug or something that they could give and manipulate conversation styles. So it's really interesting when you start looking at that. What was like, once you started identifying, especially because your spouse is a director, what did that insight sort of give you in how you are communicating the two of you?
Yeah, I think most of the time we communicate well. We're very opposites, but very compatible in that way. So I do not do well under stress. Like I shut down and talk about communicating. I just can't. He is very good at staying calm and being able to navigate not just himself, but other people through, very difficult situations or processes. So I find myself relying on him a lot from that standpoint of, okay, he's, taking the bull by the horns. And if I just follow along, then, things will work out the way it needs to go. I think the conflict happens more when he's fine and I'm stressed. So then I start to perceive, okay, you're just, I'm my mind is focused on this one thing and you're trying to distract me with this other thing. That probably is very important. But I'm not at that place yet where I can switch gears and think about that other problem. So I think sometimes that's, where there might be conflict, and then I react in a way that, is unkind and very factor oriented. And that just causes him to react in his, director mode communication even stronger. So, that's when I think I see conflict, can happen, because I just, that whole over focus thing, you can't stop your brain from doing what your brain is doing at that moment, and move on to the next thing. So
that is a huge awareness, because what's really cool about it is that now that you've recognized this, now that you've sort of talked out and identified, and you're now like fully aware of like, oh, that's what happens. And then he like digs in deeper into the director because he's trying to get his point across, because he sees that this is a problem and he wants to move me forward into where we need to go. But I am focused on this. So I'm just going to get like, then I'm going to get like even more focused because I feel like you're trying to distract me from what's important without really giving me the emotional and the why behind it. Right. It's like because it's a director mode. It's like giving you the direction, but not giving you all the stuff that goes with it. So, factor and director are very similar styles. So it is really helpful because you both are coming from a let's just get the stuff out there without all the feely stuff. But that's a really good thing to know, that both of you have to, in certain situations, incorporate some of the feely stuff just for a little bit, right? You got to engage some of that captivator and engage some of that listener. Because now you guys will never, when this starts to come up and you start to experience this, because of this new awareness, it will not happen the same way. You guys are going to both do something different. I'm curious, has he taken the quiz, the communication style quiz?
No, I haven't given
it to him.
I should give it to him.
Yes, definitely.
I'll try to corner him in the next couple of days and make him take it. He'll probably be like, what is this?
I would be really interested because, that's the self-assessment identifier of what's your natural primary communication style, what's your secondary, what's the tertiary. And I would be so curious to see sort of where it lines up. And if it lines up with where you guys had sort of like mentally ticked off, this is the box for
where we pegged each other. Yeah.
I always be such an interesting conversation. I would love that.
Yeah.
So as you're thinking about all the things in your life, because you've made some big shifts, you started your own business.
Yes.
You have now grown to the place where you are very quickly you've hired some employees. So now taking these communication styles, knowing these things, like you're thinking, okay, I've got to, I can't just be a factor all the time. I also have to be a listener. I have to give, some space and things because of the experiences that you've been through. What are some conscious things that you have when you started to hire someone and you knew you were onboarding them? What are some things that you've put into place to make sure that they have a better experience than you did?
Yeah, that's a good question because I don't know the answer to that. Excuse me. I will say that I did not, I tried very hard not to say, I want this type of person with this type of experience. Excuse me. I started out wanting to hire one person. And then I realized I really do have enough work to hire 2 part-time people. And eventually, my goal is to grow significantly this year. And so eventually, I'll have plenty of work for both of them to do. And I did not want to to be honest, I did not want to go through this hiring process again in 3 to 6 months. Just no, thank you. So I went ahead and hired 2 people, but personality wise, they are very different. And I won't say that was on purpose, but it was something I kept in the back of my mind of, I have tasks that are very detail oriented and, there's a lot of, reoccurring stuff that has to be done, but it has to be done right. It has to be done by someone who, really is good at figuring out, the process and making sure it's done right. And so one person I hired very much falls in that line. And then I also have stuff that is just a mess and I need somebody who can figure it out and and is not gonna, is gonna have, the personality type to, try new things and okay, well, if it didn't work, then we'll try something different. And so I have, another person who is very much that, I feel like is very much that personality type. Both of them are excellent. Both of them are picking up on things. I onboarded both of them pretty much at the beginning of this week. So I'm just now starting to figure out, how good they are at their job. But both of them are excellent and both of them are figuring things out, but it's been really helpful to have, different, level of diversity already. Even if it's not cultural diversity, there's probably, just different communication styles and different personalities that will be interesting to see how it all works together. But I think it'll be for a good thing, not a bad thing. Because the last thing I want is to be homogeneous, to never be challenged, to never, see things differently. And the more people around me I can have that can see things differently or see a problem that maybe I didn't anticipate, the better. And so, I'm trying to keep that in my mind too, of I don't want to be, everybody has to be this type of fit company.
I love it because you
Yeah.
describe both of these positions in very different ways because of the need that you have for the task. And it's like your first person needed to be very detail oriented, very process and structure driven because there was a certain and specific way that this has to happen. And then your second one is like, I need someone to take like all the chaos and make sense of it. Right. So I call that the fun in the chaos. Like you got to have somebody that's like super curious, willing to like see all the mess and go, oh, okay, I see the patterns in the process and the structure and the framework that comes from this. But I also know that there's going to be some experimentation and I'm okay with the uncomfortable messiness. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So I would be really curious to see like since you're just onboarding, sort of how you identify their communication styles and also like their peak performance hours, because that's something that makes a big difference. Like you said, you didn't like people coming to you at 5 o'clock at the end of the day. Like that was like at the end of your day where you have used all your brain power for all the innovative, creative things, the start of the day, right? That's just sort of a wrap it up, get out the door, go home and recharge. And I think that's so interesting because, some people like they start really slow in the morning. The afternoon is like, boom, that's when it works for them. But when you know people's peak performance times, then when you know that, hey, Rebekah is a peak performance morning person. So if I need something done, I need to get it to her to where she's got that to do in the mornings. But I'm an afternoon person, let's say, which I'm not, I'm a morning person, but let's say I'm an afternoon person and I don't get going until like 3 o'clock. So when I show up with like all my brain stuff is firing on all cylinders and I'm creative and this is all my stuff coming out, I know that when I deliver this to you, because this is when it's working for me, to say, hey, I know this is the end of your day. So don't even look at this. Just know that it's in your box for you in the morning when you're fresh and it's all good. And you know that I'm not sending it to you to pressure you to do it right then. This is just when it works for my brain. And by the time you work it out in the morning and you send it back to me, it's probably the same time that my brain kicks back in. So, if you expected me to respond first thing in the morning with it, and just knowing those types of things, not just communication styles, but those peak performance hours, like how game changing is that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I'm very fortunate that the work I do and the work I need them to do doesn't need to be done at a specific time of day, but I need it quickly. Like I need it, I need it, within that 24, 48-hour time frame. So if you want to do it at 2 a.m, do it at 2 a.m. And that's fine with me. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to kind of see that. I might even, I just thought about that Cloverleaf
Yes.
website that you have suggested. I might look into that and see if it's worth, getting a subscription and signing them up for a couple of the assessments because it'd be interesting to find out, personality types and communication types and all of that.
They have a really great feature now. They've just updated everything. So I'm just learning because I had to call and talk.
Yeah.
Now, this is how much I like Cloverleaf. I made a phone call and talked to a person. That's how much I wanted this information. But they've just hit like 1 million people that they have helped with Cloverleaf with their platform. And I love it because it really does speak our language and the way that it sets things up. But they have a feature called Teams. Now they've got some new stuff and I'm just learning about all of it. And I've got a team I've put together that we're testing this out here in the next week or two. So I'll be really interested and we'll definitely have to like sort of share notes and navigate this because it has been really a wonderful tool and a resource, not just for business, but for my personal life. Like I send it to all my friends. I send it to my family. My partner and I have done it. I mean, it's really amazing because they've got the disc, the Enneagram, which is my favorite. And there's a lot of reasons why, specifically if you are of varying neurotypes. Like if you're in a neurodiverse relationship where you've got a neurotypical and a neurodivergent brain, then it's really beneficial because there's so many layers within the Enneagram that really make a difference. And the wings influence your primary number, which is cool. Yeah. But I love it. I love that you're looking at it and thinking about using it. So Rebekah, as we're wrapping up, I would love to know, and for you to share, if you have one thing or a couple of things, that's fine, but something that you really feel like the new person that just learned that they're autistic, they're an adult and they're just like, wow, this is me. I'm so excited. I finally have some answers. What's the one thing you would really like them to know as they're starting their journey today?
I think the first thing I would tell that person is to learn not just to accept yourself, but to love how you are uniquely knitted together. I do not wake up in the morning feeling disabled. I really don't like that disability. I don't like the D in ASD. I feel like at the end of my day, I'm possibly disabled because of all of the interactions and chaos and things that happened throughout the day. But what I've learned is the more I learn about myself, the more I learn to realize that I am uniquely put together. And that is just a different wiring. That is not, I'm not disabled. I'm not lazy. I'm not hormonal. I'm not, flaky, but I am autistic. And that means that I have a different way of thinking, and that's okay. Like, that's not a bad thing. The second thing I would tell that person is to learn to self-advocate. Because I found, like I said, I found that employers, HR professionals, healthcare professionals, I've had similar issues in the insurance industry lately that I think I shared with you. They do not know when approached with an accommodation request what to do. And so you are going to have to be the expert, unfortunately, until things change in our society. You can go I went out to the Job Accommodation Network, which is really a really excellent tool. It has actual suggested accommodations for different needs. So whether it's a communication need or, like you said, a time, you need a time change to your job, whatever it is, they have just a list of accommodations that people have asked for and have been accepted under the EEOC guidance. So, become your own expert. You're going to have to educate your family. You're going to have to educate your employers. You're going to have to educate your healthcare providers, especially your mental health care providers. The therapies don't work the same way on us like they do on the neurotypical person. So just do your research and become your own self-advocate, because you're going to need that.
Excellent advice, excellent insights, Rebekah. Truly. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for sharing your journey. Thank you for sharing your insights and your experiences. And we are amazing. You are amazing. And I love what you're doing in the world. I love who you're being in the world. And I so appreciate that you were here sharing all of the wonderful things that are happening in your life, starting a new business, hiring new employees. These are fantastic things. This is what makes a difference in the world. Doing it our way, our unique way, and showing that it's possible, that we are incredible entrepreneurs. We just do it differently. And thank you for showing up and doing that.
Yes. And thank you for having me on. I really appreciate the time and the conversation, and can't wait to hear more.
Awesome. Well, guys, if you're interested and you want to learn more about communication styles, the Coaching Cafe Academy is open. We are here. We are accepting members. We would love for you guys to come join us. We have fun conversations. We've already had several Zoom calls together. We're getting to know each other. We're not just there to talk about communication styles. We show up and we encourage and support one another, even like, hey, I just had a crappy week. This is what happened. I just need somebody to talk to and share. We're doing that because it's not just about our communication ecosystem. It's also about community. So if you're looking for community, and you're a woman who's looking for a place to find some friends and find people that get it. And, hey, I just hit perimenopause, so come on over. We're talking about that too. We'll see you soon, guys. Bye-bye.
If you are someone who likes to help people and share what has made a difference in your life, please share this talk show with a friend and on your social media accounts so that you can be the blessing in another late identified autistic's life. Be sure to tag me at Social Autie so I can personally say thank you. And to help keep the talk show ad-free, please consider becoming a one-time or recurring supporter through either Buy Me a Coffee or the Anchor podcast links in the show notes below. I truly appreciate your support. Thank you for being a listener, and thank you for adding your voice to our story.